And speaking of revelations from Guantanamo Bay, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has referred to yet another batch of files that he has. Apparently, they're the personal files of all the prisoners who've been held at Gitmo. No word, though, on when and if they're going to be published. And, of course, Assange remains at the center of all the WikiLeaks media hype. But as he conducts interviews from a mansion in England, Private First Class Bradley Manning, the soldier the military believes is responsible for downloading and, of course, leaking all this information, he's being held in solitary confinement at the Quantico Marine Corps base in Virginia. Now, this is causing groups like the Psychologists for Social Responsibility to speak out. And the president of that group, Stephen Souls, is talking to us from Massachusetts for more. Stephen, very good to see you. So you wrote a letter, I have it right here, to Defense Secretary Robert Gates. What drove you to write this letter? And talk a little bit more about what you're urging him and the Obama administration to do in regards to Manning.
Well, our organization, Psychologists for Social Responsibility, has been very concerned about torture and psychological torture in particular for a number of years. And one of the aspects of psychological torture, one of the techniques used, is isolation. So we were very concerned when we heard that Bradley Manning, who it's important to understand has not been convicted of any crime, has been held in solitary confinement now for 5 months, since July. And our understanding, as he's reported by his attorney and it's pretty much confirmed by the government, is he's kept in his cell 23 hours a day. He's not allowed to even exercise. If he tries to do push-ups, they go in and stop him. He's not allowed to sleep during the day. He has virtually nothing to do. He's supposedly allowed to exercise for 1 hour a day, but that means only walking in a figure 8 with shackles on in a completely isolated room. Now, we as psychologists know that this type of isolation is very harmful to people. You know, people live in a social environment. We live with other people, with our families, with our spouses, with our friends, with our colleagues. And when we're isolated from that, we do not do well.
Stephen, when you say we don't do well, I just want you to elaborate on this. I mean, the conditions that he's placed in, those that you described, what does that really do to one's psyche? I mean, talk a little bit more about that from your professional perspective.
Well, it induces a sense of listlessness, of hopelessness. In many people, it induces depression, anxiety, sometimes suicidal thoughts, cognitive confusion, being unable to think clearly, and in some cases even hallucinations and delusions. So this is not something that anybody should be subjected to except in the most extreme circumstances, which there's no evidence that this is. It also poses another problem, which is it can interfere with his ability to get an adequate defense. Namely, if you're suffering cognitive confusion, listlessness, hopelessness, depression, you're not able to cooperate with your attorneys very well and to actually do what's needed for a defense.
But not only that, but wouldn't it sort of compromise his ability to not only have a fair trial, but also cooperate with authorities? I mean, if he's in this state, in this mentally traumatic state, then can they really take, is there any credibility to whatever he might tell them?
That's a good question. Those who support torture and forms of abuse talk about all the great information you get from it. But not only does it lead sometimes to people telling what the interrogators want to know, but what you're also saying is it leads to cognitive, you're not very clear. And if you want good information, you need people who are clear. As one veteran interrogator said to me, if I want to interrogate someone, I want him to get 10 hours sleep the night before. I don't want him to be sleep deprived because I want him thinking clearly. How else are they going to be able to tell me who, where, what, when?
It's interesting because you've written and you've said before that this is, quote, unusual and inhumane treatment, and you say that it's in violation of U.S. law. So if that's the case, then essentially how are they getting away with it?
Well, unfortunately, in the last decade, the government's got away with a lot of things which in saner times they wouldn't have gotten away with. it's up to citizens to say this isn't the kind of America we want to live in.
You know, given
and that's part of why we wrote the letter.
Given everything that you just said, especially given the fact that these studies, they go back hundreds, if not thousands of years of what solitary confinement does to a person, why haven't we seen any kind of change then, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, over the last 40 years in our country, we've had a very punitive attitude toward prisoners. Solitary confinement is sort of the ultimate in punitive nature. Some countries, I think European countries, have become more humane in their penal system. They have much lower rates of recidivism than we have in this country. And it's unfortunate that, in fact, I think that these things like solitary confinement are counterproductive.
You made a good point earlier saying that, Manning, let's not forget, hasn't yet been convicted of a crime. I mean, he's the main suspect, but no conviction yet. So what does that say about the system then? Is it innocent until proven guilty, or the other way around in this case?
Well, we don't know what's going on. I mean, there is speculation that there may be attempts to pressure him to cooperate in getting Julian Assange. You were talking about it in the lead-up. I don't know. I mean, I don't have insights to what the government's up to. To some degree, this is a brutality that sometimes goes on in our justice system. To some degree, this is, I think, punishment for him, that they're trying to send a message that this is what will happen to whistleblowers. And there may be other factors we're unaware of.
Oh, it's a very
but it really doesn't matter. This is not what should be done. It's not right.
That's a very interesting point. What message does this send? And are they doing this to Manning in order, like you say, to send that kind of message? Stephen Solge, President of Psychologists for Social Responsibility. Thanks so much for your time and analysis today, Stephen.